So it's 2021, you have an iPad, you don't always want to carry around a computer or laptop everywhere you go, but you still want to edit photos, especially when you are on the go. And maybe one day we'll be able to travel again, which only makes this more important in your mind. Can you edit on the iPad though? What is going on, everyone? My name is Finn Badgley. If you're new around here, I am a commercial fashion and portrait photographer, and today I am walking you through how to, and if you can, edit effectively on an iPad. The model that I'm using currently is the 2020 iPad Air. Compared it to the Pro and just figured it was the way to go. So right off the bat here, we have an image open from one of my recent Skillshare courses. This is a test shoot I did with the wonderful model and actor Andrea, and that course will be linked down in the description below if you want to take a look at that, figure out how I would shoot an image like this or anything like that. But with all of that said, let's take a look here. We're starting off in Lightroom Mobile, and then I'm going to transfer over to Photoshop to see if that is a viable thing. I've heard mixed things about Photoshop on the iPad. I've had a bit of experience with it myself, and I want to see if it's something that I can get away with or if it's not quite there. So right off the bat here, we got a pretty solid image out the gate. There's a definite mood and a definite vibe going on here, and I'm just gonna go through a usual edit that I would do in Lightroom or Capture One on my computer. So here we are. I just want to bring down the highlights right off the bat. We got some little bit of harshness in those guys up top, so we'll bring it down a bit. That's looking pretty good. Bring up the shadows a little bit maybe. Yeah, that looks good. And I don't want to do anything too crazy here. Perhaps I will give if you've been following me along anytime, you know I like giving a good old little S curve in there. I don't want to do anything too crazy. Just make it, yeah, something like, okay. So now with that out of the way, I think that's pretty good there. Now, what do we want to do? We want to play with the color. I think it's a little warm, but it is an intentionally warm shot, so it does make sense. But maybe I'll bring the temperature down just a little bit. And that looks pretty good. The tint, I really don't want to mess with too much. I lit this in a very specific way, so there's a bit of pink in the top area here, but it's a nice warm kind of orangey yellow glow overall. But we will play with the color mix and the grading and everything like that. Now we do have this new kind of color grading thingamajig here, and we're going to play with that. It is a new feature that they installed here. I'm not sponsored by Adobe or anything like that. I'm just playing around with this to give you guys an idea if you can edit a photo or a couple photos that you took on the go, and maybe you don't need to bring out your laptop or use a desktop setup quite as much. So on the shadows here, maybe I'll give a bit of that, give a bit of a greeny teal kind of look. I don't want anything too intense, so we'll bring up a bit and we'll bring the balance up a heck of a lot, just so that way it takes it out of the main areas. So I don't want it too much, I just want it a little bit subtly in the shadows. You can see the difference that made there. Now the midtones we're going to go a little different with to even it out with a nice orangey vibe. This is a little too yellow for me, so I'll do that nicely, and then perhaps bring the luminance of everything up. And what are we looking at for the highlights? If I do a similar kind of subtle orange, I don't want to go too intense, because if I do, then we're getting something really weird. So right about there seems okay. And the luminance I won't play with too much. However, I do want to crop this guy in a little bit. We're getting a little weirdness down here and along the side. Actually, the way this is shot, I might be able to get away with a 4:5 crop, and if you know anything about Instagram, anything like that, that works very well, because then when you go to post, it's not going to crop off the top and bottoms of your images, since we all know how much we love that, right? Right, okay. think that actually looks pretty good. It's pretty solid. We are losing the one bulb up there. You know what, maybe we'll undo that. And maybe we'll just have to fight Instagram when we go to post this, or maybe this will just become a story. Because I want to get rid of that weirdness on the side here, just to create more of a uniform look. And I want to crop out as much of the bottom as I can here without interfering with her hand too much. I'll come down a bit in the top, just keeping enough of everything that's going on. And I think that works a lot better, tightens everything up, works pretty well. Okay, now with that out of the way, if we want to zoom in a little bit here, you can see we did use a mix of soft and hard light for this shot, so I am going to retouch a bit of the skin, what have you. And with that, we'll take the healing brush and we'll see what this guy can do. Select a couple areas, anything that's kind of giving us some trouble. We'll just smoothen it out a bit. Feather everything perhaps a little bit more. This guy, we're going to move around a little bit because we are losing a lot of that texture in the skin, which is what we don't want. So we're just going to move it around until we find a nice point that we're happy with. I think there looks pretty good. You can see that works quite a bit better. Although it's that different color. All the other ones are pretty okay, but this one's just giving us a bit of problems. So maybe something like that's a little better. It's nothing too crazy. Not doing any real serious skin retouching or anything like that. So I think that's looking pretty good for right now. Now there are a whole bunch of presets and stuff like that. I'm not going to get into those right now, mainly because I just like to find a look for myself. And we got our little selective adjustments here. So say if I want to take a nice big ol' gradient and just pull it down a little bit like that. Maybe I want to play up this backlight that's in the back there a little bit, that nice soft pink. And for that, what are we going to do here? What are we going to do? I am going to make it a little more magenta until we're pretty happy. Go a little drastic with it, and we'll warm it up a little bit too while we're at it. Again, we're just playing that up a little bit more. And if we want, we can increase the exposure just a little bit, but we will also drag down the highlights so we're not blowing anything out while we are increasing the exposure. I do think that is looking pretty good. Now the colors are a little subtle, so if we do want, we can increase vibrance just a little bit, make it a little punchier, add a little bit more drama in there, especially when we have a lot of warmth. We got those red pants going on, so we want to show off that kind of thing. And overall, I think I am pretty happy with that. So you can see that's where we started with, and that's where we got. It's mostly a color grade that we did here, but I quite like it. Now, if we want, we'll bring this to a good old edit in Photoshop. Okay, and now we are in Photoshop now, and we'll see what we can do here to play around and make things a little more refined, if you will. So we got our layer here. We got some adjustment layers here. Effects, filters, smart filters, all that kind of stuff. Continuing on the retouching train here, and I do want to decrease the size a little bit, and we'll just paint some areas in, if it'll let me zoom in enough. And that's kind of the one area that we had some issue with earlier, so we'll just paint that in. And any real problem areas that aren't too big of a deal. Again, I'm trying to keep this pretty natural. I'm not looking to go crazy here. Sometimes images call for that, or who you're shooting for will want it, but for my own work, I like to keep it natural for the most part, especially in this day and age. I think the time of making everything look overly, some might say plastic, is gone with the wind, so we're kind of trying to keep everything fairly natural while still just a little refined. If it will let me zoom out, which I don't know if it will. There we go. And we got a little areas like those little highlights on the pants there. Okay, we got a fresh card in the camera now, so we're ready to go. It's full, but that's why it's handy to have extra cards everywhere. Eraser, we got our brush tool, we got some transformations, all that kind of stuff. Now, I don't think I'm going to be able to do anything like I would usually do in terms of frequency separation or anything like that, but overall, for something nice and quick on the go, this isn't too bad. I could see myself using it here and there, but I definitely think Lightroom Mobile is pretty powerful, and I would like to see a couple updates to Photoshop just to add in some extra capabilities. For what it is, it's not terrible. Also, full disclosure, I am fairly new to this version of Photoshop. I have been just mainly using it on a desktop my entire life, so this is a bit of a learning curve as well. Something like Lightroom I'm definitely more familiar with, so I kind of know how everything works, whereas Photoshop for the iPad here, it's a little more finicky, I've found, and it has a bit more quirks to be worked out, but I'm sure Adobe will get there. And I'm also sure that I'm not even using it to the best of its abilities, because I haven't really used it that much. And, well, that's just how it is. And I just made a new layer there, so now I can properly come in and do a little more spot healing, and that way it's non-destructive. You know, we are all about these non-destructive edits, and this is how we do them. So now maybe I just want to add a little bit of brightness to the face. So I'll come down here, hold that guy, add a new adjustment layer. I'm going to do a little bit of curves action going on here. And I'll do what I like to do usually, which is add a brighter layer and a darker layer, so that way I can paint in my highlights and I can paint in my shadows. Basically, I'm just using a very non-destructive version of dodging and burning. That's all it is. There we go, that'll work. And then I will go here to my brush tool, flip that guy over, and now we're just going to paint in that bit of brightness that we have going on there. How big's our brush? One a bit bigger. Opacity we'll bring down a little bit. Hardness, nice, we're at 0 there. You know what, opacity will bring down a lot. Usually when I'm doing this, I'll use a feather. I'll use a feather of about 5 to give you an idea. I'm just going to very lightly, and perhaps I will drastically increase the size of the brush to make it a little more even, or a lot, so I can see what I'm doing. Currently, it doesn't like to be doing too much. There we go. Just doing a little more now. I'll just paint under the eyes and around that general T-zone, as we call it. Now, currently we are very drastic in how much we are adding in terms of the overall brightening of everything here. Just going on top of the brow bones. And we'll take this guy and bring the opacity way down, so it's looking quite a bit more natural, just like that. And that is looking quite a bit better, but we also want to make sure that we are, if we're brightening the face, we want to add that to the rest of the body as well, which is why I'm just going to generally paint in brightening the high points of everything. So you can see, if we turn that on and off now, the difference we are getting. Do want to bring the opacity down a little bit more, just so that way it is still quite nice and natural. And with that, we are going to add another curves layer, which will be our contour, as I like to call it, or our shadow layer. So come here again, paint that sucker black, and then we will paint in those shadow areas so that they are a little bit darker. Again, using a nice big brush, I am just going to softly and subtly paint in. Currently I'm going around the edges of a lot of things, and all that's doing is refining that, just making everything look a little more defined. If I come up here to the face, drop the size quite a bit, that's about good. And what I'm just going to do is emphasize those cheekbones, emphasize the jawline, the temples, make it quite a bit smaller, come in a little tighter, and then I'm just going to emphasize some more of those areas there. And overall, I think that looks pretty good for what we're getting. Again, it's not perfect, but for something that you can get away with on the go, it certainly does its job. You can see kind of where we started with and where we got. And through both Lightroom and Photoshop, this does a pretty fantastic job. I would like to see a little more functionality brought to the iPad version of Photoshop, and perhaps over time Adobe will keep updating it and making it better, especially now that the iPads are certainly built to handle it, especially the Air and the Pro. So that way we photographers can get as much out of this as possible. Again, it is a bit of a learning curve coming from the desktop Photoshop, and that's just kind of figuring out where things are. I think Lightroom is currently a little more intuitive still, but it is not too difficult to get the hang of, especially when you're already used to Photoshop. So all in all, if you're a photographer looking to add the iPad into your editing workflow, especially if you're on the go and have to send out a couple quick edits, or if you don't have access to your laptop and want to get some editing done, I definitely think it is a viable option. Especially, it does depend on the type of photo you are editing. It might have a couple more hiccups, or it might be a little more difficult to get through it, especially as quick as you are used to in your regular workflow. But I definitely think it's possible, and it is a viable option that you can add in with your workflow. So with all that said, if you enjoyed this video, if you got some value out of it, drop a like, leave a comment if you like this kind of thing. If you want to see more photo editing or iPad for photographers videos from me in the future, subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the bell to be notified when I post new videos so you never miss an upload. And as always, I will see you on the next one.